Alright. It's come to my attention that during the combat tracker portion I did not talk about pausing and unpausing the game. By default, to pause or unpause the game, all you have to do is hit spacebar, and that will disappear, and you'll notice that game paused, swirling symbol disappeared. And that means that players can move freely. They are no longer restricted by the game being paused. Now that we've gotten that housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about scenes. Ignore the encounter muncher, that's from a module. What we really want to talk about is folders and scenes. So I'm going to create a folder, and we're going to call it a test folder, because that's what it is, more or less. You'll notice that indexed here, I have the sort settings set so that apparently that wants to sit at the top. And you'll notice that by default, no one has ownership of that except DMs. And I can create another folder in here. I can also create a scene. Let's create a scene. Let's do generic town, which is the same name as this scene, I believe, by how I made it. No, town demonstration is what I named it. But you can actually name multiple scenes with the same name without any issues, unless you have something that references the name of a scene, in which case it will cause major issues. By default, Foundry does not care. But if you have a module like multi-level token that moves things across scenes and requires you to specify the name of the scene, that can cause major issues. We talked a little bit about setting up scenes before, so I won't go into too much detail here, but you see accessibility for navigation, and you can set that to GM only or all players. The navigation name, if you want that to look different, background image. We talked about that in the first video. One thing I didn't mention, padding percentage. If you adjust that, it will increase that area of these gray squares around the map. You can use those to, say, put tokens on that you want to bring out, but if you do that, make sure to wall off your map so that players can't move out there. Ratio, you can also lock ratio. Grid, you can change grid size. You can also change the grid type if you want to change that further. All sorts of things, but we covered most of these settings already, so we're not going to do anything. We're just going to have this empty blank generic scene. So we don't actually really care about making a scene right now. We already discussed that. What we want to do is deal with how we interact with this scene tab. So you can move scenes in and out of folders, and you can see that there's a whole lot of folders here. You've already probably seen me click through a few of these if you've watched all of these. I have a lot of folders on the server because I've been running the server for about 8 months now on Foundry. And so there are some other things you can do here that are worth talking about. You can activate a scene. When you activate a scene, that is where players will go when they first log in. So if you have a scene active, that is what your players will see when they first join the virtual tabletop. So you can be working on a different scene. So you'll notice this little target icon indicates that this is the active scene. I can click back to that town scene you were just on because I have navigation enabled for it. And I can see it up here and click back to it. The active scene will always show up in this navigation bar. Let's go back, and you'll notice that compared to the active scene, there's some options here. So if the scene isn't active, you can toggle navigation. You can't do that if the scene is active. View scene, you can actually view the active scene if it is not your currently viewed scene. That has nothing to do with which scene is active, but it is something that will disappear when you're looking at a particular scene that you have. Toggle navigation, regenerate thumbnail image. You've noticed that the thumbnail keeps rubber banding back to the wrong thumbnail. It is going to drive me insane. Clear folder. We're not going to do that here. Clear folder will basically move all the scenes out of the folder. You can delete a scene. If you delete a scene that's active, it will take you to a black screen. You can import and export data or export from MoleNet Cloud. That's from the MoleNet module. Don't worry about these. They're for people who are actually making maps and doing really complicated stuff. Importing data would be if you have a map that you have the JSON for, but you don't have the actual physical map, or you want to put it over a different map. You could import the data from another scene to that. But we're not going to worry about that. You can also duplicate a scene, which will put copy on the end. And then you can delete a scene. If you delete an active scene, more correctly, the scene you're looking at, you'll go to this Foundry background with the gray dots. But then if you want to get rid of that, you just click back to another scene. And once it loads, you will see things as per normal. I think that more or less does it for... you'll notice that since I toggle navigation, it will now disappear, but I actually want to make that the active scene. And then you can delete folders. There are two ways to delete folders. can remove the folder, you can delete all. I should probably also mention that there are a couple things you can do with folders that you can't do with scenes specifically. You can export them to compendiums. We'll talk about compendiums in a bit, but excuse me. Compendiums are basically a way for modules to import data. Unless you're planning to export something, you don't really need to do that. You can change folder names and colors. You can also switch the sorting modes. The sorting mode applies to things inside the folder. You can also create a rollable table. So, for example, if I do that, and then it says so 1d1, it only has one entry. So if you want to, say, have random battle maps, you could prepare 8 different scenes with pre-made encounters on them, and then make a roll table that you could roll. And when you roll that, it would say, okay, that's the scene that the party is going to for this random encounter. We'll talk about roll tables a little more in a bit. But that is something you can do, and that's something that could be very interesting. But what we want to do right now is click this delete all button and delete this folder. And then we will move on to the next item, actors, in the next video.